Okay, welcome back to my YouTube channel, guys. Today we are going to talk about all things healthcare. New Zealand versus USA healthcare system. Now, if you don't know us, we are a family of 6 that have lived in New Zealand for 5 years. And welcome to my channel. We kind of talk about what it's like living overseas in New Zealand. So subscribe to below. And this is going to be a great episode where I share stories about what it's like in the healthcare system in both countries. Here we go. Okay, so many of you have asked me about healthcare and comparing the two. And the reason why I haven't is because they're both very large systems and it's hard to talk about things that you haven't necessarily experienced yourself or to really know about. Like I know the kind of the overall view of things, but I don't necessarily know the nitty-gritty of the details on either side when you haven't actually gone through it. So I thought today would be better if we just did a little bit of story time, where I talk to you about what it's like to go through the healthcare system with 4 children in both countries, so you can get kind of a glimpse, and I'm comfortable talking about that because that's what we've actually gone through and what I've experienced personally. So here we go. Okay, let's talk about the US first. Now, in the US, you need to have insurance. If you don't have insurance, you have to buy it like private from a private company, which for us, when you are self-employed, you have to buy it. And it was about $1,000 a month just for insurance. When you work for a company with a family as large as ours, it's generally, I would say, affordable for a single person, but for a family as large as ours, it was like $300 to $600 a month just to have insurance. And then when you go to the doctor, you have to pay the co-pays of like between $30 and $40, sometimes $50, depending on who your doctor is. And then that doesn't really include prescriptions either. You can get like little cards and it'll be a little bit cheaper, but it all depends. It was only cheaper on, say, the generic brands. And so as a family, I always felt that the healthcare system was always a very stressful thing. Now you need to note that my family is healthy. We don't have any like chronic diseases or issues where we would need prescriptions every month. But on our taxes, I would probably have $3,000 to $5,000 of healthcare costs a year just for a healthy family, in addition to what I'm paying for insurance, just because everything is expensive in that arena. Now let's talk about how it's set up. So in New Zealand, you have like a general practice doctor for the whole family, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in the US, you have a pediatrician for your kids, you have an OB for women's health, you have general practice doctors as well, but you have tons and tons and tons of specialization. And so you don't generally all go to the same doctor, and you go to different doctors for different reasons, and that's kind of how it's set up. And so when you get there and you say, they ask you, do you have insurance? And do you have your insurance card? And you give them your insurance card, they just go from there. And so what happens is when I would go in, after living in New Zealand and getting used to things being a reasonable price, and then when I moved back to the States and when I would go in and I would say, well, how much is this going to cost me? Nobody can tell you. And so this is the weirdest thing about a healthcare system of which nobody can tell you how much anything is. They can give you an estimate. So how great is it to be in a business where you don't have to be upfront about what your cost is? Just think about that for a minute. Basically what happens in the US is that the doctor doesn't know how much the insurance company is going to pay them, so they charge an enormous amount just to make sure that their costs are covered. So this is why the doctor can't really tell you. So I went to a couple doctors and said, hey, can I just pay you directly and we not bill my insurance? And like, how much would that be? And so many were totally willing to do that. And they're all totally reasonable price. Like going to see the doctor, they charge me $150, fine. Not billing the insurance and then like every appointment after that, just for a checkup was like $50. And like, that's fine. Okay, let's talk about prescriptions. Prescriptions in the US. Yeah, so you're getting a prescription from a doctor. They don't know how much it's gonna be. You always know in the US to always ask for the generic version because that'll be cheaper than any sort of branded prescription. And then on top of that, you have to, depending on where you go, the price changes. So there'll be a pharmacy that will be more expensive because of its location and convenience to the doctor. Or, you can go to a Walmart, like a big box store, and get the prescription, the same thing, cheaper. And so that was always a stressful thing because, like, you're in the middle of the winter, you have 3 little babies, and you're getting them all back in the car, and now we have to go to find the cheapest place to get this prescription. And then sometimes it's always shocking. Like, one time I had this little bottle of cream, like itch cream or something, and it was like they wanted to charge me like $1,000 for the cream. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, there's no generic form for that particular prescription. And so I'm like, oh, I'm not paying $1,000. Like, you have to evaluate how much you're suffering at that point. And so I called the doctor and said, is there any other type of prescription that might help? And then he wrote another one, and then you have to go back to the place and you have to get and it's just, the whole thing is stressful because you don't know how much it's going to be. And so I found that I would really get to know my local pharmacist that was at a reasonable price, because you could have the doctor, fax it in or whatever, email it to the pharmacist, so then you could show up and it would be ready to go. But then it's ready to go and it's too expensive, or you want a different brand because it's cheaper. And generally the pharmacist will always find you the cheapest because they know. One time I went to get an MRI, and I went to the receptionist and I said, I need to know how much this is going to cost. And she's like, there's no way of knowing that. And I go, let me just talk to you straight. And this isn't fun for me. Like, I feel like everybody was watching me. And I said, there has to be some sense of how much this is going to cost, because it wasn't something I initially had to do, but it would really help. And so I was like, can you just go ask? So she went back, asked a bunch of doctors, came back, and they said, most likely you're going to be billed around $1,200 for this. And I remember turning around, walking out. I was upset because, like, that's so outrageous. Like, I'm paying all this money to have insurance. I'm trying to be a legitimate citizen. I just need to get something checked out, and it was $1,200. And so I called up the doctor I was working with, and I said, I'm sorry, like, this is just outrageous, and I can't afford it. And I was trying to be, on top of things and not just being burdened by all of these bills. And so they said, oh, you know what? I have a friend who can probably do it. And I ended up getting the same thing for like $150, $200 because I made an effort to do that, and they understand it. So the doctors in the US are sitting in a situation where their hands are tied. They don't want people to be paying outrageous amount of money. If we were to just let doctors charge what it is their cost is before they have to pay all of this insurance to protect them and all of these rules that the insurance companies put in, it would be much more reasonable, because I think people are willing to pay reasonable prices for healthcare. If I go to the doctor and I'm taking your time, I'm expecting to pay, $100, like, that's fine. But like, when I go in, I just have no idea on what the cost is or what I'm going to get billed in the end, is absolutely outrageous and really unacceptable. And so that's what it's like living in the US with a family in their healthcare system. Okay, let's talk about the New Zealand healthcare system. So I'm just going to tell you some stories about my experiences going through this living here. So when we first moved here, I just asked around, like, what do you do? I knew it was nationalized healthcare, that it was free if you were a resident, and we were on a resident visa, so we were allowed to do that, but I didn't really know what that means. I don't really know how the structure is set up. And so they're like, oh, you just go to your local doctor. So you generally go to the doctor within the area that you live, generally, and you sign up with them, and you sign up your whole family. So this was a new experience, that you sign up your whole family with that particular GP. Not that you're going to use them. Like, my whole family signed up with a couple of GPs in the past, and we've never used them because we're just healthy and we don't need to go in. But, you just get signed on. So then when there is a problem, if someone's sick or whatever, you just call and you make an appointment. So this has been my experience. So when I signed up for my local GP, I'm like, oh, okay, that's nice and it's close. I went, so one of my kids got sick, and so I called them. And also in the States, you can wait a long time to get an appointment. It's not generally really easy. And then if you go to urgent care or after hours care or whatever it is, you have to kind of sit in the waiting room for hours with your sick kid, and it's not great. So there I'm like, okay, he's sick, but I probably won't get in for a couple days. And so I knew that I needed to me, like I'm trained to just kind of call early, right? If you think there's anything, just to get an appointment. And so I called, they're like, oh, we'll just bring him in this afternoon. I'm like, what? This afternoon I can get in to see the doctor already? I'm like, all right. And I'm sure this isn't the case everywhere, but just telling you my experience. So we went in there, got it all checked out, really nice, really loved the nurses and the doctor, and it was really great. And you just felt like you had, the other thing is like when you go to the doctor in the States, it's like you're mainly working with the nurse, and then you get about like what feels like 20 seconds with the doctor, and like, okay, here are my questions. I used to write them all down because I would forget, because like you kind of go in that panic mode because you only got like 20 seconds with the doctor. And so I'm like, and then this, and then they're gone, whereas it wasn't like that. Nobody felt rushed here. Anyway, that was my experience. And so we got a prescription for an antibiotic, and I said, okay, so where should I go? What would be like the cheapest place? And she kind of looked at me and she was like, anywhere is the same price. I'm like, what? Anywhere is the same price? What an idea. And so really, if their kids were under 13, they're free. I was like, what do you mean it's free? When I went to the pharmacist, I'm like, what do you mean it's free? Or it's like $5. Or some of the prescriptions for me were like $10. And I know there's different rules where you have like community cards. I don't know. It's so cheap compared to anything I've ever bought in the US for prescriptions. It was like amazing. And like, it was so great because here they have like the doctor or the clinic, and they'll have the chemist, as they say here, or the pharmacist, like right in the same building. How great for moms with little kids to just be able to go down and get their prescription and not have to like go out and run on these huge big box stores and like you have to walk a mile just to get to the counter. And so that was really, really refreshing when I got here. And then just like the price of them was just so cheap, and they give you a lot. And I was like, wow, I love this place. So then I also had friends that visited New Zealand, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know if you're covered or whatever. Yet all the healthcare covers visitors as well. All of the same rules apply. So she could go when her baby was sick, and I think she paid $30 copay. And they do have copays here. Like you go to the doctor, you do a copay, which is reasonable. Okay, but you're not paying insurance every month. There is privatized insurance here that you can buy. But you can go for free. So basically the way that the process works here is if something happens, you're injured, you're sick or whatever, you go to your general practice doctor. And then if you need to go to a specialist from there, that will also be covered if it goes through your GP. Now, if you want to get privatized insurance, you can then go right to the specialist doctor without going through that process because you have the insurance. And so that's kind of nice. We personally have insurance because as Americans, it's weird to think about not having insurance, but also because my husband works for a company that subsidizes it. And I think we also have some dental riders and that sort of thing on ours. And so I think it pays like $70 a month for everybody. It's like amazing. And then it just gives us, and it's a really good plan, and we can just kind of do whatever. And so we do. But you don't have to do that. You can go through and everything would be paid for. Another system in New Zealand that I'd like to touch on, because it's one of the best in the world, is their ACC program. So in New Zealand, if you get injured, doesn't have to be at work, it could be riding a bike, it could be on the playground with your kids, and it could be your fault. It's a no-fault policy. Doesn't even matter if it's your fault. If you get injured, ACC, if you go to the doctor, ACC, and you say this is an injury, ACC related, they'll pay for most of it. Now there's, various little rules here and there, but in general, the concept is they have this accident insurance that companies pay for that covers you in an accident. And not only that, is if you get injured, they will pay 80% of your salary until you're able to go back to work if you're not able to work due to the injury. So not only do they pay your healthcare costs, most of them, there'll be little things here and there, but then you also get, you still get paid like you're working for however many, because I know friends that have had like a car accident or had an injury and they were out of work for months, 8 months, 9 months, and they got 80% of their salary the whole time. Like, how amazing is that? Now, in the US, they don't really have anything like that at all. You have various insurances depending on what field you work in. Like, I used to own a construction company, so we had special accident insurance because it was, you know, more prone to accident, but you certainly wouldn't need it for like a desk job. And so it was really amazing that they have, you know, this service here, and it covers anybody, whether a resident or a visitor or anything. So the ACC program, and you can look into more details online, is really amazing. The healthcare system between the two countries are very different. It's very interesting to be in a society where you don't have that stress. It is so nice in New Zealand as a family to not have that huge stress of healthcare costs that you have to pay, and the unknown healthcare costs that you have to pay in the US is what really causes a lot of stress. So I don't know if you guys feel that way or experience that. So please comment below and share your own personal stories with healthcare, whether it's in the US or in New Zealand. I would love to hear it. And if you clarify anything I said wrong, please do so. But until next week, I will see you later.